Hi, my name is Ronan Mahan and I'm going to show you how to use Filther for Substance. Filther works the same for Substance Designer, Substance Painter or Alchemist, but I'm going to use Painter as an example. The first thing you want to do is to install the effect by dropping the SBSAR file and the metadata folder into the Documents Algorithmic Substance Painter Shelf Effects directory. You then need to restart Substance Painter to access the filter. I'm going to drag material onto my mesh and instance that across the texture sets. So next up I'm going to come down to my filters section and I'm going to drag Filther here on top of my layer stack. So you should now see filth being applied to your material. To access the options of Filther, just click on the filter here and I'm going to talk you through how the various parameters work. At the top here you can see which channels are being affected by Filther. So if I turn off color, I'm no longer affecting the color channel. Next up are some attributes which quickly explain how Filther works. We've got 35 presets to choose from, so if you know what you already want to make, like blood, you can very quickly switch between the pre-made filter effects. You've got some UV controls here, so if you want to play with the tiling or the offsets, you can do that here, as well as rotation or turn off tile safe rotation. You can also use triplanar projection. So in case you don't want to use the UVs that come with mesh. Enabling triplanar projection also allows you to have multiple filth inputs. So you could have a spotted effect on the top and streaks down the side. I'll show you more of that later. For now we're going to stick with triplanar and maybe let's change the texture tiling a little bit. Next up are your main controls for Filther. This is where you'll do the majority of your work with Filther. At the top here you've got filth type. So you can very quickly slide between 19 different procedural filths. So it's very quick to change between the type of filth. So if you want to have a streaky or spotted effect, let's choose this spotted effect, and we can play with our amount. So this is the amount of the filth affecting our material. We've got a mask contrast. This is the sharpness of the mask that's being applied. Next, you've got a global opacity. This affects the opacity of all the layers that Filther is affecting. So if I pull this down, you can see our base color starts to be blended with the layers below. We've also got a global blur. So we can blur all the layers that Filther is affecting. We can invert the filth mask, so we can get a negative effect. Next, we've got some color control. So I can give this, say, a red color. You can choose between several colorizing methods. So you can choose none. So this would be useful if you just wanted to do a wet stain, for example. Or you can choose up to a 3-color blend. So I can blend between these 3 colors across the filth. You can use this to get a complex and interesting colorization of the filth itself. So I'm going to change this maybe to a more dark, deeper red. So you can see already I've got maybe sort of like a dried out bloodstain effect just by playing with these 3 colors. You can also adjust the parameters for how these colors are applied. So here I can change the mask position for that dark section. So you can choose where that 3rd color is being applied to the filth mask. You can also play with luminance variation. So if I come to the right, I've got a lot of variation in the luminance, and to the left, very little. So you can see this more in the base color. If I come to the right, you can see I've got my original dark and bright pixels. If I come all the way to the left, this color starts to completely override the base color. So this is useful if you want to blend your color more with the original base color, or if you want to completely override it. Next up is our smart blend section. So here we can enable height mask blending. If I switch to filth, maybe you can see this a little better with. So something like this filth here, you can see I play with my height offset, and right now it's just being transferred onto these top edges, and if I go all the way through, it starts to go into the deep recesses or invert the height mask. You can see now the filth is just being applied to the deepest recesses of the underlying material. I can play with my contrast if I really want a soft, subtle effect or a really hard height map. So here I'll go for something softer, a bit like the blood is sort of sitting in the lowest cracks here. I can also play with the opacity, so if I just want to blend that with, this is the original effect and this is the full height mask version, so if I still want a little bit of that original filth to come through. I've also got a relief balance control, so fully to the right here is a very sharp and detailed height map, and full to the left it starts to get more subtle and softer shapes, and this is useful depending on how much detail you want in that mask. So if I come all the way to the right here, you can see I've got all of this little thread detail, and if I come to the left it's sort of softening that mask that's being used, so I can get a more softer height mask effect. The height mask source channel defaults to auto, and this will sample your scene below and try and find the best solution for generating this height mask. It prioritizes normal information over a height mask in Painter because normal information usually has more detail in it. If it can't find normal information or height map information, it then defaults to base color. So it tries to generate a height map based off the base color. You can also manually select which channel you want to use. So if I change to normal, you can see that that's what it was using to generate this height map. If I change to height, you can see that it doesn't really have any height map information to use. That's because my underlying material doesn't have height map information. If I turn that on, you can now see that it uses the height map instead. And again, the offsets and controls are the same. And finally, you can try and use the base color to generate this height map. So this is possibly not the best way of doing it, but just in case you haven't got any sort of normal information or height map information, you can see that this smart filter still works. The great thing about everything that we've done here is that we can very quickly change which filth we want to use. So all the effects and settings that we set below are still preserved when we change our filth type. Next, we've got some base color control, so we can control our opacity of the base color. This is useful for blending with the layers below, or if you just wanted to do, for example, a damp patch or something that affected normal, you can completely remove the base color. Next, you've got some base color disorder. If we bring this up, we start to see a little bit of black and white disorder appearing in our base color. You've also got a scale control for that. So come all the way to the right, it's very detailed. And to the left, it's much bigger, softer shapes. So I'll choose something like this. Next, we've got roughness control. So if you want to give your filth roughness, so I can change the roughness to being something quite wet, for example. So that's like a wet, fresh blood. You've again got a roughness disorder, so you can start to bring a bit of disorder into that roughness in case you wanted to add some subtle variation to the roughness itself. We've got a rough mass spread control, so if you come to the right, you can see that the roughness value for the filth starts to spread outward, and if we come to the left, it starts to recess into the central parts of the filth. So this is useful for just doing maybe a wet center and a dry edge, or if you want your filth to look like it's spreading damp further out than the extent of the filth itself. Finally, we've got a rough mask contrast control just for sharpening up that roughness mask if you need to. Next up, we've got some normal control. If you want to add normals to your filth, you can turn this on. You can see here now our filth has some normal information. I've got an intensity slider, so I can raise or lower the intensity of the normal map, as well as a softness. So if I find this detail too harsh and sharp, I can soften it down a little bit and soften some of those edges. I've also got a normal mask balance control. So I can, if you see here, I can change where the normals start to apply to the filth. So if I pull it inwards, this is only normals for the central sections of my filth, so I can pull that inwards and maybe lower the intensities of the normal. So now there's only normal information right for the center of my filth here itself, as well as a contrast control, so I can increase the sharpness of that edge here. I can also invert the normals, so looking like it's indented rather than pushing out from the surface itself. So right now my blend mode for normals is set to combine, and what this does is it just combines the two normal maps over each other. If I set this mode to replace, you can see that the normal map of my filth starts to actually replace the normal of the underlying surface. So before there was normal information here, but now the normal of the filth is actually being preserved over the top. I've got a replace bias, so if I come all the way to the right, I just fully use the normals of the filth itself. And if I come all the way to the left, it just uses the underlying normals. So if I set that to somewhere, say here in the middle. So I've also got a thickness settings. And what this does is it blurs the normals on the underlying material. So if I increase that thickness slider, it starts to blur these normals, and this makes it look like a thicker fluid or liquid over the top. So if I come right up, this is very soft, subtle normal underneath. If I bring it down, you can see it's much sharper and I start to get more details. So this is like a thickness simulator. If I bring this up a bit, it looks like this is a thicker kind of blood on the top. Next up is some metallic control in case you need a metallic effect. So right now the filth has a metallic of black, or you can change it to white, and in case you need a metal-like effect. We can affect subsurface scattering with the filth, so in case you want to affect how transparent or how much light passes through a material based on the filth, you can start to affect that here. Finally, we've got some custom masks and inputs, so I can enable a custom filth. So once I've enabled custom filth, I can choose any black and white input. So for example, this spots here. And now all of the filth is being driven by this mask, so I can play with the balance, for example. So this allows you to import any custom black and white input, and it will still work with all of the parameter settings that we've set before. You can also paint directly into Filther using a custom mask. Just come down to custom mask and inputs and turn on enable custom mask user 1. Next, you need to enable user 1 in your channels. Press the little user 1 here. And now on the filter itself, just add a new paint layer. You want this paint layer to be below Filther because Filther needs to read this information to be able to use it. On your paint layer, come down and make sure it's only applying to user 1. And now when you paint, you'll paint directly into the Filther mask. You can see here I'm directly painting into the Filther mask itself. White adds to the mask. Mid-grey reveals the masks, so it just returns into the state that the filter normally is without any external input. A full black removes filth from your filter. So using this method, you can now paint out the bits of filter that you don't want and keep the bits that you do, and also add in extra filth if you need it, if you haven't got the effect that you want. Use any of the brushes as well to adjust that paint. So just remember to add the user 1 channel and to paint only in that user 1 channel in the way described. So again, the great thing about everything that I've just done is that it's affected by this filth type slider on the top. So I can change this to one that looks more like what I need. Say if I wanted scratches or I want to invert the mask, I can do that. Or I can randomize to get the effect that I want once if I'm not happy. Or if I want to change the actual preset that I'm using, I can come here to presets and change that to grease, for example. Now I've got like an oily grease going over the top of the surface, which I can randomize. Or chipped paint. I can add chipped paint to the surface. And again, all controlled by your main filter settings, your filter type. It just gets applied over the top of your material. The other great thing is that this is all being driven by the material below. So if I was to change that material, let's change it to say some sort of concrete. You can see here now my filter is adapted to what's underneath. So now it's being affected by this concrete which is underneath the filth itself. You can see how this paint applies to this concrete in a really sensitive way. And if I change that concrete even to some sort of leather, you can see now it's starting to adapt to what the underlying surface is doing. Or I can change to some sort of wood, and now my paint is only applying to these materials in a very natural and easy to use manner. And I'm able to just switch my filters to one that I want, play with the random seed, and I end up with very quickly being able to get the effect that I want. And maybe I'll change this to an old sort of varnish and change the type of wood that's underneath. And finally I'll instance this filter across all the texture sets, and you can see very quickly how easy it is to texture using Filther. Finally, I've also included a smart material version of Filther, which is called Filther Smart. Just drag this on top of your asset, and let's just change the filter to being something we can see a bit better. Maybe this, change to this grease, increase the amount maybe. So the way this smart filter works is I've just set it up so that you can easily now start painting into the layers that you want to, that's already been set up for you. So the user 1 channel where you can paint into the filter is there, or remove some of the filth that you don't want. So that's already set up. I've also added in an anchor point, and what this anchor point does is it taps into the filter that we've created. This allows you to access the final mask that's been generated by filters. So you can see here in this fill layer, I'm tapping into the anchor point for the user 2 channel, and the user 2 channel displays the final end result of the filter mask. So you can see here, there's the user 2 channel. And this could be used, say, if you want to, instead of using one of these presets like grease or whatever, you could drag in one of your already made materials like car paint, for example. So now this car paint is being masked by the filter itself, or you could put in a metal or anything like that. So now you have access to the mask being generated by filter. If I play around with the filter types, you can see that the mask up here is tapping into the final end mask of filter. So using the smart material is just a little bit faster because I've already set up this user 1 paint layer and the access to the user 2 mask being generated by filter. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have the UV controls changed to triplanar and set the filter inputs to 2 inputs, you can now change the filth that's being used when it's projected from the side on. So for example there, I can change the side to a more streaky shape, but from the top down I've got a more blobby shape like drops landing. So now there I can mix and match 2 different types of filth being used. From the side it's streaking down, and from above it's more like a sticky stud on sort of filth instead. One final thing to mention is you can still use all your favorite smart masks with filter. So just put filter within a group. So I can just drag on this moss from above, for example. And now the filter is just being applied from above. So all of your usual smart masks work with filter as well. So the combination of filter itself plus all the substance smart masks makes for a very easy to use workflow. So that's a quick overview of filter. I really hope you enjoy using it.